So I know what you're thinking. I just stole a PS5 from 7-Eleven and I need some game recommendations. Don't worry, I got you. So today in this tier list video, here's what we're working with. Goat cheese. These are the games that are truly goated, greatest of all time, nobody can touch them. Good use of $70. I know what it's like out there. You're making $2 an hour. This is an acceptable use of your hard-earned money. Wait for sale / PS Plus means that this game might be worth a little bit of time, but it's not worth $70. Mid means we're not going to avoid this game like the plague, but it's not exactly a deserving use of our time and money. Avoid is going to be the true Ebola level, double mask level, even IGN probably gave it a bad review level games that we're just not going to want you to play at all. Astro's Playroom is just adorable as hell. Makes a fantastic first impression. It's charming, it's free, it's like a good first date. The use of the haptics on the PS5 DualSense in this game is still unmatched. This game does the best job of like making your hands feel like you're ice skating when you're like ice skating in the game. Like what other game can say that? Like I'm ice skating in the game and it feels like I'm ice skating in my hand. This game is awesome because you're gonna love it whether PS5 is your first PlayStation console or PS5 is your fifth PlayStation console. Astro's Playroom is goat cheese. Astro's Playroom is undeniably, unquestionably goat cheese, but Demon's Souls PS5, this is where it gets a little bit subjective, a little bit personal. If you're new to From Software games, this is not where I'd recommend that you jump in on. The new coat of paint, the graphics, the visual presentation is truly outstanding, but if you're unfamiliar with the mechanics of how these games work, this is going to be a brutal first introduction. Some of the mechanics in this game are actually so vague and challenging that From Software took them out for future titles, like World Tendency, if you know what I'm talking about. Demon's Souls as a game may be a 9 out of 10, but for the purposes of this tier list, I'm putting it in wait for sale / PS Plus. Destruction All-Stars is a day-and-date PS Plus game, meaning that towards the end of development, they came in and said, this looks like trash, let's give it to people for free. So that's exactly what they did. And unlike Astro's Playroom, it wasn't the good kind of free. Astro's Playroom is like Costco sample free. Destruction All-Stars is like letting the employees at the donut shop eat the old donuts type of free. Go ahead and skip this one. Final Fantasy 16. Final Fantasy 16 is kind of in an unfortunate position. The game is big and beautiful. It's a really, really solid Final Fantasy game, but it also comes kind of sandwiched in between the re-release of Final Fantasy 7, which is definitely the game that Final Fantasy players are the most excited for. With so many games in the franchise, not all of them are going to be true standouts, and when you're going up against a game that's the caliber of Final Fantasy 7, it's going to be hard to stand out. I'd really recommend holding off on Final Fantasy 16 until you're more into the series and giving 7 a go-ahead first. I'm gonna go ahead and say wait for a sale on Final Fantasy 16, try out Final Fantasy 7 first, and make sure you're committed to Final Fantasy before spending the time and money that's going to be required to get into 16. Final Fantasy 7 Remake Intergrade. This is my first Final Fantasy game ever, and it completely blew me away. This game just has that spark of adventure that you'd find in like a Star Wars movie or an Indiana Jones movie that you just don't see too much in stories anymore. I don't have nostalgia for Final Fantasy 7 because I haven't played it before, but the remake is so good that it almost kind of gave me retroactive nostalgia. Final Fantasy 7 Remake Intergrade is a good use of $70. Forspoken is kind of like if you traveled back to the year 2004 through Uncharted 2 and Final Fantasy 15 at your computer with ChatGPT open and just charged $70 for whatever the result was. Forspoken is really, really surprising because most of the time when Sony pays money to release a third-party publisher's game as an exclusive, it's a pretty serious stamp of approval. Forspoken was a serious miscalculation. Forspoken's legacy will be measured more in terms of first-week memes than first-week sales. This game was just a total disaster all the way around, and I honestly kind of feel bad for the people involved. But unfortunately, for the sake of recommending games to you, I am going to have to put Forspoken in the avoid category. Ghostwire Tokyo isn't quite the abomination that Forspoken is. Somebody at Sony clearly saw some potential there that didn't actually make it into the final game, because Ghostwire Tokyo is truly mediocre. The gameplay doesn't feel very innovative and the graphics don't feel very next gen. There's nothing going on with the story that anyone really needs to feel or experience, and so if you're truly bored and just kind of want to see what's up with this game, go ahead and try it out. I'm not going to say you need to avoid this game. It's not going to crush your soul in the same way that Forspoken is, but it's really not going to do you any favors either. It's crazy that Sony paid for this to be an exclusive, and then Microsoft acquired the publishing rights in the Bethesda deal, because this game is truly not worth any disagreement over exclusivity. As far as I'm concerned, throw it on the 3DS. Ghostwire Tokyo is truly mid. Godfall. They actually had the audacity to try and charge $70 for Godfall. Godfall's quality feels more along the lines of a mobile game than a PS5 next-gen exclusive. I'm going to go ahead and throw Godfall in the avoid category. Uncharted Legacy of Thieves Collection. For all these PS4 re-releases, it's really going to depend on whether or not you've played the game already. If you have, and you're a graphics person or a trophy person, you're going to want to jump back in, see the new sparkly coat of paint, get the platinum trophy. It'll definitely be worth the money for you. If you've already played the game and you don't care about graphics and you don't care about trophy lists, this is probably not going to be a wise use of your money. But for anyone who hasn't played these games before, you're definitely going to want to jump in and experience the PS5 version of these games over the PS4 version. I'm throwing Uncharted, Spider-Man, and Last of Us remasters in the good use of $70 category. Now, Last of Us Part 1. This is a different story. This is a little bit more along the lines of the Demon's Souls remake. This is a ground-up rebuild of the original game. This is not a remaster. They remade the entire thing with the modern Naughty Dog engine. And unlike Demon's Souls, which is not very accessible and not a good starting point for FromSoft games, Last of Us Part 1 is pretty much the perfect place to jump in on the series. I would even say play Last of Us Part 1 before you watch the show. Because of the significance of this game and just how much work was clearly poured into this ground-up rebuild of the game, whether you have or have not played Last of Us Part 1 yet, it's goat cheese. Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart is a stellar Ratchet & Clank game. It's one of PlayStation 5's best looking titles, and if you enjoy PlayStation games like Astrobot or Little Big Planet, this game is going to be perfect for you. The one problem with this game though is that for the asking price, it's a little light on content. It barely even took me 12 hours to platinum the entire game, as you don't even need to run through it twice. Because there are a couple of other Insomniac titles on PS5 that have a lot more content for the asking price, I'm gonna go ahead and put Ratchet & Clank and wait for PS Plus, which is fine because it's already there. Returnal is a really tricky one because, like Demon's Souls, it's an absolutely fantastic game that has kind of a high barrier for entry. If you look at the trophy percentages of this game, a significant chunk of people who bought this game never made it past the first boss. Returnal is an absolute masterclass in game design. Unlike Demon's Souls, it's not an outdated iteration of what it is, it's the best version of what it is. And even though it's kind of inaccessible, it's my favorite PlayStation 5 game so far. Returnal is goat cheese. Spider-Man 2. I think the story that's told here can go toe-to-toe with Into the Spider-Verse or Spider-Man 2 or Far From Home, and honestly win. Spider-Man 2 is absolutely fantastic. But I said that Insomniac's other PS5 game, Ratchet & Clank, didn't have enough content. Spider-Man 1 and Spider-Man 2 kind of suffer from the opposite issue where it feels like there's honestly a little bit of bloating. I love how amazing the story in this game is, and I love how next-gen the graphics are. However, I'd also love it if the game design felt more next-gen and not so PS4 era open world. Spider-Man 2 is fantastic, and it's definitely a crowd pleaser, but I think looking back on this generation, we're not going to remember it as one of the best games released. It doesn't necessarily reach for the stars in terms of game design in the same way that Returnal did. It's not quite as breathtakingly and cohesively polished as something like The Last of Us Part 1. And while Astra's Playroom is this free, welcoming little appetizer to PS5 that you can play in 10 hours, Spider-Man 2 is really hefty in terms of its content and pretty expensive in terms of its asking price. So while I think Spider-Man 2 is worth $70, I don't necessarily think that it's goat cheese. Stray is 3 hours long. I loved this game. I thought the atmosphere was insane. I thought the art direction was outstanding. I thought the sound design was outstanding. The game truly creates a vibe and an atmosphere that is incredibly unique and memorable. But like a lot of indie titles, it stands out more because of its artistic integrity rather than its gameplay design. And while that's okay depending on what you're looking for, it does mean that Stray is not quite the complete package when it comes to being able to recommend it. Stray is a really cool experience, but it's not something you're going to go back to again and again. And I think whether or not it's even worth the asking price is going to change radically depending on how into cats the person you're talking to is. Stray, as the last game in the tier list, is going in wait for sale.